Well, welcome to the subcommittee meeting for assessment and performance subcommittee. I had sent yesterday performance measures laid out for the accountability model and the sanctions model for EPPs, and kind of an overview of what each of those measures would include, which ones were included in law, and then also the process on how the data would come out for each of those measures. I wanted to actually Andrew's in here. Andrew's gonna go over the reason why we needed to revamp or hold off on sharing it with Pepsi this coming month.
Morning or afternoon, everybody.
And
Let's come over
Okay.
there. Who all's on?
Dr. Graham, Dr. Dempsey.
The A squad. Hope you guys are doing all right.
Friday afternoon, we had nothing else to do.
Exactly.
Well, so let me get you up to speed with what's going on. Like late in the game, as you both know, we were working on this accountability model that was essentially weighted. Another way of thinking about it is that pyramid that we had, where we had a variety of items in it, and the perception was that some items would be are more important than others. And long story short, and I think it's in the document we sent. We have the actual law in there, right?
It's the last page.
So if you scroll down to the last page,
And I shared my screen so everybody can use it.
yeah, if you look at the last thing, essentially the way they have this thing worded, it cannot function that way. The only way, so in other words,
It's actually page 4, I'm sorry.
yeah, so it's on page 4, and in there, if any of these things are not met, it triggers, either sanctions, probation, or revocation. And so despite the fact that our more nuanced perceptions of how this thing should roll out, the way the law is set up, that's what's going to prevent it. And that ultimately is what caused me to throw the brakes on presenting last month. Does everybody see what I'm referring to or have any questions about what I'm talking about there? Okay. So in essence, what we did was we kind of went, so we're going to go back up to the top here. So because Kim and I have been working with Kevin Bastian from Epic to think about some of these things. So this document that we sent you basically has these different areas that are required, and where the commission has flexibility still lies in a couple things. One would be if the commission's will is to add additional criteria, they could add additional criteria. So the law currently has 4 requirements in play, if we
First 4.
yeah, it's essentially the first 4 that you see there, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll also notice the point of contention that has been going on within this subcommittee on accountability is around the notion of number 4. And number 4 has to do with the various inputs of the student characteristics. So, and just as a quick reminder, we heard from one strong voice was this idea from Andrew Lakis that can and should the commission take a stand in some creative way to try and force the issue of bringing more diversity into the teacher population, and so. That is a perception that's out there. There's a second perception out there from some EPPs. I think that was largely voiced on behalf of the independent colleges, which was to say, look, I hear what you're saying, but EPPs really don't grab candidates until their junior year. So it's not like we're out recruiting. We're essentially pulling from a population that's already within the institution. And so when Kim and I went and presented at the independent colleges and universities, quarterly meeting, one of the things that we had come up with was this notion of, well, maybe we could come up with a strategy that would champion the notion of, okay, so if you have an all polka dot institution and only a couple of stripes, that the EPP then could meet or exceed that same population that it's pulling from within the institution, right? So for example, if I had 20% minority candidates at my institution, it would be folly for me to think that I'm going to somehow suddenly have 80 or 90% minority candidates within that population at my EPP level. But if I could meet or exceed the 20%, or if we could create something there that would be either a bonus point strategy or something like that, that may be a place to go there, right? So this is an example of one of those areas that was a point of contention, and it's sitting to further complicate this thing. It's sitting on the cusp of another law which may make it go away. And when I say make it go away, if you look at 4A, 4A is something that's being proposed right now in a House Bill 107 that's basically saying get rid of number 4 and instead let's go with an outcome which is 2-year retention rate for individuals who've completed an EPP and become fully initially licensed and employed in North Carolina public school. So I know Dr. Graham and Dr. Dempsey, I know you both are familiar with, we do that 4-year retention rate. We've done that for a couple years on the report card. This is essentially doing that, but at the 2-year level, not the 4-year level. So that's something we're already cooking. But it's still, whether 107 flies or not, it still comes back to whether this subcommittee thinks and believes that there should be additional layers of accountability on top of the 4 that are being required. So that's one layer. So you can come up with additional things. Everybody needs to be taller than 6'5", and that would be a criteria, right? So that's one area that you have some control. The second area that I want to draw your attention to. Can you go back up to number
Surveys.
1? I'm sorry. Number 3.
Yes.
So if you look at number 3, when a requirement in law is results from the Educator Satisfaction Survey, and we have the Educator Satisfaction Survey, and we also have the Employer Survey. So there's 2 surveys cooking out there. So if we put both of those in there, then this subcommittee can weight those 2 components within the broader category that is stakeholder perceptions. So this group can think about that as an option, as well as the 5th one down, which has to do with EdTPA, PPAT, and the pass rates on licensure exams. So to what extent do we value those things within the overarching topic of quality of preparation? And I believe the quality of preparation was an additional one, was it not?
Yes, because it's asterisk.
Yeah. So this is one that this group has thought pretty strongly that this should be a component of the accountability model. So this is an example of one that you guys can add to the 4, whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 2, 3, 4A. And whether or not we get to 4 or 4A, whether you guys want to deal with that, this idea of race, ethnicity, and gender associated with, a component of the accountability, that's another topic out there. So hopefully that gives you some context as to, number 1, why we had to punt for an April presentation. And again, it's there's just so much stuff swirling around. I wish Tom and Kim and I had caught that earlier. But I also don't think that we're too far off the beaten trail. It's not like what you guys were tinkering with is somehow all suddenly moot. But you can also see, I hope, that it has implications for both the accountability and the sanctions side of things. So that was a lot of me bloviating, but any thoughts, comments, questions, anger, rage, concerns?
Andrew, it could be it's Friday afternoon, and our board of trustees has been here for 2 days, and I've been sitting in their meetings, and I can't process anything. Can you explain in a sentence what is the problem that needs to be addressed, and then in the second sentence, what is the fix?
Sure. So the problem is this subcommittee was taking the different components that were going to be a part of the accountability model. Think of them as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the first page or two, and we were weighting them that this one thing should be 5%, this other thing should be 15%, this third thing should be 25%. And what I'm saying to you is, while that is a nuanced and I think a very healthy approach to this, it is not doable within the way the law was presented. For sanctions. Okay. So if you do not meet any of 1, 2, 3, or 5, 4, or 5, regardless of whether we all think that should be 5% of the grand equation or 95% of the grand equation, doesn't matter. It will warrant a warning. Period. Right. And that's a big, paradigm shift from what we were doing. So think of it going from a pyramid to being a series of the same depth of bars. Like everything is weighted the same at that point.
Okay. So each one is as important as the other.
Correct.
And you have to perform at the expected level on all of them.
Right. Correct. And so if you so we have those 4 that are obligated in law. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then question 1 is, do we want to add some other things in there? The EdTPA, PPAT, and licensure exams was a 5th area. And this idea of the 4A and whether 4 or 4A are going to play ball, do we want both of those in there? And to what extent we need to further flesh out 4 in particular. So that's the topic, and then I think for this group, the decision making has to be around how are we weighting. How are we weighting number 3 and number 5 if we're keeping it in the model in terms of the little sub pieces that are within those?
So Andrew, I have a clarification question.
Sure.
If we add in something like the EdTPA, or you have to be 6'5" or taller, and institutions don't perform well in those areas, will those then trigger warnings, or is it only the things that are in law that trigger the warning?
Well, the way that my understanding and the way I interpret that, the way it's worded, it's all indicators. So if this commission decides that a 5th area, thou shalt be 6'5" or higher, that will be held to the same level of rigor as the other 4. And if you have 20 additional, those will all be equally important in value and weight.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrew, what is in the document as number 4, quality of students entering the EPP, et cetera, and then underneath that it has 4 alt. If House Bill 187 passes, the standing number 4 would come out and the new number 4 would go in. Is that what the implication is?
That is correct. So I think it's House Bill 107.
Yes, it's 107.
And 107 basically says if you pass me, number 4 goes out, and which is an input measure, and number 4A comes into play, and that will become the new requirement.
It doesn't matter who your graduates are as long as they stay in the profession for at least 2 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I'm drawing attention to the fact that there were strong opinions in the conversation over the past couple months that this idea of should we and are there creative ways that we can leverage the importance of diversity and trying to create the profession as more than just a predominantly white female profession, which we know is important for a variety of learning purposes. Is this a place to take a stand in the accountability model, or is it just so fraught with disaster that we should think about trying to create a different stance somewhere else and leave that alone for this time. So that was just a topic of, if 107 doesn't pass, it's a moot point. It's going to happen. If 107 does pass, then it's optional for the commission to still consider that as an important variable in this accountability measure.
Hey, Andrew. This is Andrew Legas.
Hey.
Hey, sorry, I joined about 7 minutes late,
That's
so
okay.
you may have already covered this, but I think it's an important just issue to raise. And forgive me if you did cover it already, but just to make sure the other subcommittee members understand that the other big aha you had, right, was that these are not aggregated. And so you could be an absolute all-star at the highest level of the rubric on 3 points, miss one of these 4 requirements, get the warning, and essentially have your EPP shut down after 3 years, even if 3 are great and one is not meeting the mark, right?
That's exactly right. So, and that's where I was saying that we can't do the pyramid anymore. We got to do, they are all of equal value and equal importance. That is correct.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
I
that's
get
bad
it now.
policy. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
I almost,
I really
I'm
don't like that.
I'm sorry. I almost wonder if it's worth, even if we get through this cycle, that Pepsi's job, as I understand it, is to do this very thinking. So one thing we could do is, all right, here's the model that we can operate under, given whether 107 passes or not or whatever. But you legislators, you should look very carefully at our nuanced and our personal opinion on this, because we think about this all day, every day, and we live in this space, and just give that to them, and maybe that'll give them some food for thought in the future. But for the moment, we have to cook what we have in front of us at the very least.
Right, we can't, the problem is Senate Bill 599 constrains us to have to do what we're doing. And in order for us to propose something else, it has to be changed in legislation.
Correct. So again, I'm not saying let's drop the entire nuanced pyramid, but I think we can hand that to people over there, and they could probably throw it in the trash. But I'm saying I don't think that's a bad, I think that was rich and powerful thinking that should be shared where we can share it. But for the moment, we are obligated to deal with the law.
Right, but I guess my question, Andrew, is it's too late in the current legislative session to revise 599 for the purpose of adopting the model we'd like to propose.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, so interestingly here, I think I'm hesitant to open this can of worms on a Friday at 2:30 because it could consume the next 36 hours for smart thinking people. But just to play this out hypothetically, if HB 107 doesn't get approved and signed into law before June 15th, then we're essentially going to propose a model that's based on the original law that would then have to be changed, though it's already gone into implementation on June 15th. So I mean, why that came up to me is like, I just think there's a little bit of a train wreck happening here, just generally. And we just need to be aware of that, and I suppose have multiple models that we could then pull if the law changes. But Van, to your question, I mean, I think right now, if the case were to be made that this should be an aggregate, which is what Tennessee does, and that actually allows for accountability in the way that maybe the law was designed, then I think somebody could propose that and get that through in the session. But I don't know that we have the political, I mean, this goes back to what you and I were talking about a few weeks ago, Van, which is like, what's the role of the commission?
Right. Yeah, I'm all for proposing the model as we developed it. I think that's absolutely what we should do. But I think we have to be ready for what is Plan D if
Yep.
either number one, they don't like it, or number two, they can't enact it.
Yep.
We just gotta have a Plan B.
Okay, so let me just share, this is Andrew again, let me just share back what I'm hearing. So it sounds like potentially, we could, I think it's three of us that are on the call, the three, there's five total, but three subcommittee members. The three of you can look at what we're cooking right now, this alternative universe here, and come up with, this is what we think we want to deal with, and then we could present a discussion item to the broader commission in the beginning of May that basically says, look, here's two ways of looking at this. One is a nuanced way, and this is the preferred way if we finish ironing this out, and talk through with the commission some of these different areas and get that ironed out. And then we can, through the voice of Chairman Miller, and whatever other stakeholders we can drum up, we can send that back to them and say, look, make these modifications because you assigned us to do this thinking, and now this is our thinking. And then have a second topic, which is if we don't go down the path of our nuanced and correct way of doing it, this is our Plan B, which is what you have in front of you right now, which I think we can walk through this fairly quickly, so that so the commission is ready to deal with both. Does that sound like what I'm hearing you guys are interested in thinking about?
I think so.
That is correct.
The one thing I would just raise up for us to think about, and y'all push me if I'm misinterpreting this, but in my mind, I want us to be cautious about. I think there's two different things we're talking about here. So the pyramid model we built, I'm a fan of. We spent a lot of time building it. I think it's nuanced and great. And we could propose that to them as like the example of what we could have. I actually still think there's a separate issue that maybe wants to be tackled, or the recommendation should be made very clearly, that the bigger problem as we see it is that we have a disaggregated accountability model as opposed to an aggregated accountability model. Like just construction wise, like it doesn't even matter what we were to put into the accountability model. It's just the fact that like, we're not rolling it up into an aggregate to figure out how effective an EPP is. It's like you can be great in 3 things or 6 things or whatever we lay out, and if you're not good at this one, you could be shut down. That seems like the thing that's problematic. And I almost want to separate what we would suggest as the pyramid model from naming that as being problematic.
Yes, I agree with you completely.
Okay, good. So do you think, let me just push you a little bit more on that, Andrew. So could you make the case that the nuanced pyramid strategy, as well as this idea of disaggregated versus aggregated, be the approach? Could we have that conversation with both of those together?
I think we could and maybe should. My concern there would be that the pyramid may end up serving as a diversion or distraction, and that they may be whoever we raise this up to may be starting to dig into the pyramid and start to have questions about that or not want to move forward with that. And I would say, okay, we could talk about that, but like the thing we really need to fix here is the fact that we shouldn't have 4 standalone criteria that any of them could submarine an EPP, even if the other 3 are good. It's almost like I don't want to distract them from what we think the real implementation nightmare is going to be.
Well, and that's an easier conversation to have, right? I mean, we can save the pyramid thing for another day if the fight you 3 collectively think is around this idea of one and done versus the idea of having more more contributions to the broader holistic perspective of the EPP.
Right. I think, Andrew, I realize the folly of what I'm about to say. And it may not even be consistent with what you just suggested. My inclination is to trust that the members of the General Assembly can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. And I realize that's problematic. Could we present the triangle model, explain that dynamic, what that problem is as a dynamic of the legislation, that you could be fantastic in all the areas but one, and because you fell just under the line on that one, everything is lost. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and to be clear, and I'm laughing and following along with the walking and chewing gum. I'm not even worried about that as much as I actually maybe what I'm really suggesting is I don't want us to get distracted either, because as the law is written, there's only 4 areas that you could be dinged for, right? We've come up with some others that we would propose. But let's just say it ends up that the only model we get is one where these 4 are the 4 things. You still have the problem of one thing being able to shut you down. And so it's less that they can't grasp both or that we couldn't use it to explain. It's that I think they're just, I think they're separate things, maybe is what I'm just, for my own logic model, I'm like, ooh, I want to separate these two. I don't want to get on the pyramid and then lose sight of the fact even if the pyramid didn't work, we could still solve this other problem.
Well, I think we proposed both things explicitly. Number one, we're proposing the pyramid model.
Gotcha.
Number two, we've got to fix this issue of a winner takes all criteria. Winner takes all. So we propose both fixes in the same proposal, and then if the pyramid model doesn't fly, we still have the second part of it on the table. Okay, even if we go back to a non-weighted model, we still need to fix this one criteria could sink the whole program.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I agree with that approach, because if we are complaining that, hey, one of these four things could sink an EPP, then the response is automatically going to be, well, if that's not the case, then what's the alternative approach? So now here's our proposal. Here's this pyramid that we're suggesting, and let's zero in on it and why we believe this approach is a better approach. If we don't put both together, my fear is we complain about one and then we leave them to their own devices, and they can say, well, we think we should write policy that forces you to go in this direction. And I would prefer we articulate what that direction should be at the same time that we're proposing changing that approach. So that way, we're not being subjected to something, but we're somewhat more in control of the direction that we could potentially take.
And Andrew, well, both Andrews and Kimberly, on the DPI side, the way the other subcommittee wrote their component, what Andrew Lackus is suggesting, in essence, has been incorporated because it's a rubric. So you've got to perform at a certain level on each component on the rubric, and you've also got to perform in the aggregate. So the way we build out that rubric model addresses the aggregate question. I'm pretty sure those rubrics were, the way that's designed would address that, right?
I think that is correct. My understanding, another way of saying it is, right now you have another level in your rubric that can't happen because of the limitations of the way the law is written.
Yes.
Yeah. So
but if they were willing to change the law, then the pyramid works, and it addresses the rubric structure, addresses Andrew's concern.
I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I'm following along with all that and appreciate it, because that makes more sense to me, and I'm on board. The one thing I'd add, then maybe I'll go in a different direction and just add here, and Andrew and Kim, it's been a few weeks, so jog my memory. But the other thing we talked about doing was taking the spirit of the pyramid, but instead of framing it as a pyramid, kind of actually just tying all of the things into these 4 areas to kind of dilute any one metric. So, and I think we had talked about kind of it looking more like a four column rubric that says, these are the 4 things the state requires. Here are the measures we think match what the state requires. Here's the percentage we give to each of these things. And here's where you would land on a 4-point rubric based on 80%, 60%, 40%, whatever. But that we would just we would build the pyramid model into that so that it was easier to follow along with the way the law is written, and B, no one metric would submarine an EPP.
Can you scroll back up? I agree with you. That was the initial thinking. But when you look at, and again, now I'm looking at page 1 at the top, number 1, performance based on the standards and criteria of annual evaluations. That is a principal evaluation of teachers by the North Carolina teaching standards. There are no other components. Like, we tried to do that in what you're seeing here in the first 2 pages, and the only place that we have multiple measures is in number 3 and number 5. Well, and also 4, which is a mess, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that. But the point is, I agree with you. I would love to do that, but in 3 of those, there are only one measure that reside in that spot, which is problematic for that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So let's do this. I propose that Kim and I put together maybe a 1-pager that kind of sort of makes this argument a coherent argument, which is to say, the top half. I'm thinking out loud here, but the top half would be to walk through the challenge of the limitations of the disag versus the aggregation in 599, and how we as a subcommittee think strongly that it should be more nuanced, and if we were to fix this in 599, here is some proposed language that would help, and here is a more nuanced pyramid that we think, it's not totally fixed, but the broader commission can actually work out those details in May, and this is what we think it looks like. And then the second half is, we understand that if you're going to promptly ignore us, we think that's dumb because you built us to do this very thinking, and now you're ignoring us, so shame on you. But if you're going to go with this idea of Plan B, which is to operate under the current strategy, this is how we would do it, and it would look like what you're looking at on your screens here on page 1 and 2. Does that sound like a strategy for a broader conversation in May?
What's the date of the May meeting?
Let's say again.
May 9th. Is that what you're asking, Van, when the next meeting is?
Because I'm gonna suggest something radical, only because it's Friday. Even if thinking through all the chances of what's likely to happen between May 9th and July 1st, including potentially some kind of legislative action having to be taken to make any of this work, is one of the things that the commission should request consideration of the delay of the implementation of this until July 1, 2020.
Sure. I mean, that's to punt and be able to come up with a viable strategy. It has just.
I was just going to say, Andrew, even if everything worked, when we get to that meeting, we're going to have 52 days to get to July 1st. I mean, that's just a recipe for doing this poorly.
I was just talking, Van, Andrew and Kim are going to think that I called you yesterday when I left my meeting with them in Tom Tomberlin, because this is exactly what I proposed. Because I actually am worried that this is the train wreck we're headed towards. It's not even just about accountability. It's the entire implementation. And my worry now is that I'm not sure anybody has the 30,000 foot vantage point to understand where that train wreck may happen. Like, I don't think I don't think any one entity has yet realized like all of these different loopholes and potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
And so I feel, you know, and I'm worried because I don't want to come back and make it seem like we're punting because we're inept and like couldn't get anywhere. I think we need to have a strong case for like what we found. But I think there are many, I think there are many challenges ahead, and I'm worried that the implementation could actually create more problems if they're not addressed.
Yeah.
For that reason, I'm not concerned about being perceived as inept. I'm more concerned about losing trust, credibility in this process, because if we move forward and we do it poorly, we're going to lose the trust of a lot of folks, and the credibility of this commission is going to be at stake. So my thing is, let's do it the first time well and make sure it's done right. That's my focus.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think there's, I mean, I don't know what the legislature knows about what we're doing, but, you know, it's not a matter of we've sat around and, you know, gone to happy hour as the Pepsi Commission. We've worked pretty hard. We've been at this work since the start. And so to me, it seems if the state board president, you know, if the state superintendent, state board president, and Patrick were making that request, and we have evidence that we've been working on this, and if it was January, not late April, we're looking at a different kind of possibility. But I just think we're down to 60 days and, you know, 52 after that meeting, and then we're going to put something on the EPPs after July 1st, and we're not even sure we could explain what we're doing. I think Andrew, I know it's a big ask, but I think the idea of the commission asking to delay the start until, and the General Assembly could say, okay, we're going to give you the delayed start, but we got to see your plan by January 1st. We're not going to give you until, you know, May of 2020 to show us the plan. You know, they could build in that kind of, I'd probably even recommend that they do, but I just think, starting to think through having this thing ready by July 1st is, I don't see it happening.
Well, and I was I think we were both talking, I was talking simultaneously with one of you, and I stopped talking about it, but do recall that I am at some point slated to go and stand in front of the Bipartisan Education Committee and talk about what is the model that we're doing. And that's supposed to happen in October, I want to say. So even if, I will go so far as to say this, even if we lobby for an extension and they say no, I still have an opportunity to stand in front of the Bipartisan Commission and say, look, this is what we came up with, and this is not the direction that we think is the smartest way to go. We think this is the smartest way to go. So we do have, there is a point in time at which it's either me or Tom, or me and Tom, or me, Tom, and Chairman Miller, you know, this idea of one of us going up and presenting our case, and we can present this multi-tiered case even if we delay it, or even if we lose and we have to operate under what we currently have. So keep that in mind. So, go ahead.
Does that mean we delay or we don't?
No, I'm happy to cheer. I mean, it sounds to me like the will of the three of you is to cheer for this idea of, first and foremost, a delay because of the potential challenges. So, you know, we need to make a case for that. So what we could do is we could put a half a page together that essentially says, we think that we need more time, and here's why we need more time. A, B, C, D, right? And then a second portion of it would be, you know, if everything goes the way it's currently set in law, this is what we came up with, which is some version of what you have in front of you right now. And here are the limitations for that, A, B, C, D. And then here's what would be ideal, right? Pyramid, being able to aggregate up and allow some flexibility so that we don't end up unintendingly like canning 3/4 of our institutions because of the way the thing is set up. And here's why we think this is good, A, B, C, D. So now I'm thinking it's a three-piecer that we can put together between now and when we present in front of the commission, and we'll obviously get that in front of you so that you can give us some feedback before we ultimately tee up a conversation at the broader commission. Does that sound doable?
Yes, I mean, I think so.
I agree.
Okay, so
Can I ask a question there, just to play devil's advocate?
of course.
I mean, I hate to say this, but if there's a world in which whoever wrote, I know who the whoever is, but let's just say there's a group that says, yeah, we actually know that it's disaggregated, and that if you miss one of the standards, you get a warning, and then you get a probation, and then you get closed. That's exactly what we intended for it to do. So no, we're not going to give you an extension, and we're not going to change the law. Do we need to at least have like the best version of what we've pulled together to be ready for that worst case scenario?
Absolutely,
Yes.
Andrew, and that's what I want to move to with this group right now, which is looking at these first 2 pages here, because that is what we have put together here is as close as we've come to deal with that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, Andrew, this is in part, I think it helps to extend your point. If we were talking to the members of the General Assembly and they said this is exactly why we wanted it this way, here's the policy dilemma to me. So if you take number 4 as it's currently written, and I'm going to assume East Carolina is the largest program in the state. So East Carolina, when they get to their annual report, has a gender imbalance. But we're going to shut down the largest program in the state because on that one indicator they had a gender imbalance and therefore they cannot certify any teachers. That's the solution to the teacher problem is on a subpoint of a subpoint, you didn't pass, therefore you cannot put any teachers in the field. I mean, that's lunacy. Now, I'm not saying lunacy is not possible. I'm just saying I can understand even why they would say we don't want you to be able to fail on one of them, but they're not all equal. The quality of your graduates is the most important indicator. And then the nature of your graduates is a complement to the demographics of your candidates is a complement to the quality. But the state of North Carolina right now couldn't shut down a provider if they wanted to, because the superintendents the next rally would be the superintendent's margin on Raleigh because we shut down APPs that were.
It would be very small. It would be 115, but it would be robust.
Well, if Glenna goes with them, it's going to be a mighty small. They'll be.
All right.
Okay.
So let me share. So I just want to clear up some potential confusion here. So Dr. Dempsey, what you referred to in number 4, the way I'm envisioning this is that according to the law, and again, can you scroll down to because I can't scroll with the left hand.
You want sanctions?
So if you go into the sanctions, the way they're saying this is that you basically, if you miss any one of the areas, right? So one of the things one of the things that I think is a little bit confusing in the way you just worded that, Dr. Dempsey, is now if we go back up to page 1, if you look at that particular item, number 4, I'm viewing number 4 as the item that is thumbs up, thumbs down. And the sub-items within number 4 can be weighted. That's how I'm viewing that.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is, if you look at number 1, number 1 has only one item. That's it. Number 2 only has one item. That's it. In the case of number 3, there are two components in there. And the question I have for you 3 is, which one, to what degree do you value one over the other? And the grouping of those 2 shall become a measure for, a thumbs up, thumbs down at the number 3. Does that make sense?
It does. I disagree. I understand the point, but I disagree with it.
You disagree that you think that they are standalone within the standalone?
No, I think they're different. So the quality of the student, that's a core one pass rate GPA question. The quality of the cohort or the student population, gender, ethnicity, full-time, part-time, those are characteristics of a cohort. So if a program consistently had a GPA problem, they're not producing graduates in the first place. I mean, theoretically, they're always right on the verge of the bubble popping because they're too close to the threshold. Mm-hmm. And so that's a different kind of dynamic for the quality of students. If a program has a gender, ethnicity, demographic concern, number one, that's going to take longer to fix over time. And two, it's a different meaning for the program. So you could be turning out, I think this is going back to a previous conversation. If you had a program like we do at UNCW, for example, elementary education is virtually all white women. That is a problem for our institution, and we know it and we talk about it. But that's not the same thing as the quality of the graduate to perform in practice. So every single one of those white women may be able to go out and be exemplary practitioners according to some of the measures. And so the question for the state becomes, do we want them to no longer produce those teachers while they're addressing the nature of the cohort problem? That's what I think, that's the dilemma the legislature has created is inadvertently you shut down a program that's turning out high quality individual people, but as a cohort, they do not reflect the needs of the state of North Carolina. If that makes sense. The General Assembly, back to Andrew Lacus's point, the General Assembly may say, we don't care. If we don't do it this way, you won't address it.
Right. So I hear what you're saying, and I think what I'm hearing you say and what Kim was putting in there. And can you guys all see what Kim's tinkering with when we're scrolling around?
Yes.
Okay. So I think she captured what you were saying, which is this idea of student characteristics versus cohort composition, basically. And obviously, number 4, the quality of students entering the EPP. There's this including the average GPA, the average score on pre-professional skills tests, so on and so forth. So that obviously is referring to, Dr. Dempsey, what you were saying, which is the core one, the entrance exam pass rates and GPA, and those other are sort of aside, they are not a part of that. But let me scroll down to page 3, I think it is. One more. Whoa. So here, this is when we were working with EPIC, which is a sort of a think tank over at UNC's system for research. And one of the things that he was saying, that Kevin Bastian was saying, is we really can only apply race, ethnicity, and gender at the overall level, and not disagging by the various subcategories of an institution's programs, which would be particularly valuable for the institution for school improvement planning, so on and so forth. So there we see, this idea of that we disaggregate, because it is a requirement in law, again, to disaggregate by race, ethnicity, and gender where we can. And, again, this idea of if we start disagging at the middle school subject level or the CTE level, we're going to get down to sample sizes that are so small, or years, so many years over so long a period of time that it doesn't have any value anymore. Just to sort of piggyback on what you're bringing up here, this idea of the race, ethnicity, and gender perhaps is not, I was just lumping all the things that we had in the pyramid into the various components that we know have to be in law up above there to see where they all could fall. And what I'm hearing you say is maybe they should not be in there, in which case it looks like the law is actually saying what has to be in there is those first two, the entrance, the core 1 pass rates and the GPA. and that's the component, and we disag where we can at the overall level for the race, ethnicity, and gender.
Yeah, just so, just so I don't want to suggest something that's more complex than it needs to be. It's back to Andrew Lacus's point that it's one of the ways to explain to the General Assembly why we don't want to have one component submarine the whole thing. And number 4 to me is an example where we could inadvertently shut down a program because we have created a misrepresentation of a quality issue. And there's a difference between the quality of the individual program completer and the quality of the cohort.
I might. I hear you, Van. The only thing I'm uneasy with, and I will name that you mentioned being radical earlier. I'm obviously pretty radical on this point, I think, but I think we got to be cautious there. It may not matter for this model, but I mean, technically, your core 1 pass rates or your GPA are going to be rolled up into a cohort characteristic anyway, and the emerging research on the benefit of students having teachers who look like them actually is starting to become quantifiable. I'm real uneasy with acting as the GPA or core pass rates. I don't think ethnicity, particularly when we're thinking about the student population that teachers are teaching, is just like a cohort characteristic.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, if you think about it as a group of individuals, the performance of any one person in a population is an individual performance. When you measure it, I'm jumping back and forth between my iPad and the screen. Okay. When you measure it against something like, for instance, performance on EdTPA, and if you have 100 students in a cohort, you have 100 performers on an assessment, and they are individual performers, and all 100 of them could pass EdTPA. That's a good thing. And every single one of them could be young white women going into elementary education. Okay. My point is not allowing that program to graduate people for that, because the cohort, the demographics of the cohort needs to be addressed, is different from how an individual performer performs on that assessment, for example, like EdTPA. And that, to me, is part of the explanation to the General Assembly, Andrew, for why we need to address your point about one item submarining the entire program, because items, and it's not a matter of weighting, it's a matter of understanding how the EPP addresses the problem. What is the problem they're having, and then how does it address it? And we say, look, they get to EdTPA, these people are knocking it out the top. We want them in classrooms. But your problem is you've got a program dilemma, because you're not educating that cohort in a way that provides them the fullest experience they can have as a cohort, because you need a cohort that is as diverse as the children they will teach. Mm-hmm. But you address the two different problems in two different ways, and that's why, particularly on the EdTPA side, that's a quality indicator that is different from the demographics of the cohort as a quality indicator, and they shouldn't be treated with one size fits all consequences.
I hear you, and I appreciate you explaining it. I don't have anything to add. That makes sense.
That didn't mean the General Assembly is going to go for it. It just means it's a way to frame the problem.
Okay, so we have, how much time do we have? We're almost out of time.
It's done.
Well, we're about out of time. So let me just ask this: are you three okay with Kim and I? First of all, if you look at the way this thing is laid out, these first 2 pages, this is Andrew and Kevin Bastian and Tom Tomerlin and Kim thinking collaboratively and trying to fit what we know to be the law after we've, discovered that one nitty-gritty detail. Are the three of you okay with us trying to present this at the fuller commission conversation, knowing that essentially what it sounds like Dr. Dempsey and Andrew and Dr. Graham that maybe pulling out the cohort components that Kim identified to reduce that number 4 down to 2 items there. Is aside from that change, do you feel like that's fairly stable? Do you agree with with that logic? If we had to meet what currently is going on in law.
If your meeting was, if the goal is to meet what's going on in law, I'm good with that. It's still problematic for me, but if the goal is to meet what's in the law, then yes.
Other thoughts?
It also doesn't mean that the entire commission won't bring up other parts of background, quality of background that they may want to add. This is not final.
And Andrew, on the bold print for number 4, if they were broken out into 2, one is the quality of students or in the student indicators. The second one is quality of the cohort. Because I agree with Andrew Lackis's point that the constitution of the cohort is essential to educating an educator well. But that is different from an individual student's indicator.
So
I agree. Philosophically, I just have a problem saying that passing the practice core means that you are a future quality student moving forward into it, because there's no correlation between practice core and teaching performance that I've seen. So, I've still got some problems in that space. But again, if the goal is to meet the language of the law, I'll take a back seat and shut up. But I do have issue with this notion of practice core and GPA being quality of student. That's problematic language for me.
Well, and I think we all agree with that, and I think 107 is likely to pass, which means that 4 goes away potentially. But I think what I'm hearing from you all is this notion of maybe we need to have maybe not the core 1 and the GPA in there, but something around the cohort as a component if 107 passes and 4 goes away.
Yeah, I mean, if this 4 goes away or is replaced with the alternate, then all of this kind of becomes moot, probably. But in my mind, and Van, I appreciate you kind of sharing what you shared a minute ago, because I think it helped me better shape my thinking. I mean, what number 4 is really trying to get at is actually the cohort, the quality of the cohort, right? Like because if you think about it as like average ACT score, average, or like racial and gender makeup of the cohort, that's actually, those are all characteristics of the cohort. If you scroll down to what we've proposed for number 5, that's where you're actually getting the individual performance and readiness to teach, right? Like with the Ed CPA and pass rates on licensure exams.
Right. And in Anthony's point he made just a second ago about core and GPA, I absolutely agree with that. And that would be the next thing to go. Because number 1, there are barriers to people entering EPPs. And number 2, they tell you virtually nothing about the quality of the student becoming.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So,
I mean, and this is where Tennessee doesn't pay attention to any of that. They just use ACT score and demographic data of the cohort.
So I also wanted to propose with the one pager that Andrew and I are going to put together, I think we should put a timeline of the work we've been doing so that the legislators would know that we've been talking to other states and we've been doing all that we can to put this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's set a goal that Kim and I try and put something together by middle of next week, and run it past this subcommittee. So there's normally 4 of you, but right now there's only 3. So we'll make sure that we include everybody on that for the subcommittee.
And there are extra members that I added from EPPs,
I don't know what that means.
because Dr. Marr, Dr. Bullock, they are not actually on that
But
subcommittee.
they're part of the leadership
Right,
crew that is
right.
leading in there. I
Right,
got
and
it.
Dr.
Okay.
Dempsey, he's on
Yeah, he's on both.
Educator, yes.
He's an interloper. So.
I need to,
So what we'll do is we'll cook something up, and it'll be ugly the first pass, and you'll just have to deal with it, and then we'll get the consensus and some input from you all, and we'll refine it a little bit so that by the time we're talking about it in May's meeting, that we can sort of make a coherent argument. But I think I'm hearing what everybody's saying here, so let's go back to the drawing board and put that together. Are there any questions about that for the moment?
can you throw in a subsection that says we need $500,000, see if anybody catches it?
Well, I was going to put that in for a raise for me and Kim, but I guess we can put $1 million in. Why not? Right?
Yeah, go higher. Go higher would be my recommendation.
Okay, go big or go home. Okay, all right. So I want to respect your time, and we've bled over a little bit. When is the next?
The next meeting's at 3:30.
Okay, and again, and that's specifically targeting the sanctions side of things. And again, I think Dr. Dempsey, what you were saying is if our proposal, our more nuanced proposal stands, then what we've been working on, I think, is stable. But we need to be thoughtful about what it's going to be if we have to go with what we currently have.
Right.
Yes,
Okay, so that's the discussion at 3:30. All right.
sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and we'll keep you posted here in a couple days. We'll zap out some info.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Talk to you shortly.
Okay, so let's grab the microphone on that. And I think we can just stay up here for a half hour, right?
Yeah, since it's less than a half hour.
We're turning.
Hi everyone, this is Megan Loftus.
We're turning the mics on right now. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Dempsey, I feel like I just talked to you.
Well, you know, recently I clicked on the wrong calendar appointment and could not figure out where you are and what was going on with DPI and why can't they answer the phone and it's not 2:00. So, it's good to talk to you again.
Are we waiting on anyone else, or do we have enough? Proceed? Okay. Let me finish the last bite of my sandwich here, so I'm not talking while I'm eating. Sorry. This is my favorite day of the month because it's Ethics Day. So they wheel in all these folks that are under duress for a variety of crazy.
Under scrutiny.
Yeah, they're under scrutiny. But the committee that's here gets Jason's Deli sandwiches, and they never eat all of them. No. And then we get the leftovers. So I was just stuffing my face with a free turkey sandwich. So.
Or it presents its own ethical dilemma, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So I just wanted to get you up to speed. So when last we spoke, there was this assumption that Kim and I were going to drag this out in front of the broader commission, and then we put the brakes on it just a couple of days beforehand, and I want to explain very carefully why that is the case. So late in the game, we discovered that the way 599 is worded, and Kim has it up in front of you right now under the sanctions category. The way sanctions is kind of laid out, it sort of prevents some of the flexibility and some of the niftiness that you guys have been working on. Insofar as essentially, if anything is not being met in the accountability model, anything, regardless of whether the Pepsi group thinks that it's the most important thing or the least important thing, if any of these components are not met, then the institution gets the corresponding warning, the corresponding probation, and the corresponding revocation, depending on where they're at. And that has confounded us because it's in essence what we've been working on has been a better way of looking at things, I would argue, but yet we are trapped within the confines of what the law is suggesting. So. Long story, slightly longer. What we've talked about with the accountability crew, which was meeting about an hour ago, and Dr. Dempsey was a part of that conversation, was this idea of maybe we need to try and make a case. Maybe we can think of this a couple ways. One is we could elevate to the broader commission in the May meeting a couple things. One is a request that Dr. Miller, Chairman Miller, try and make a case to the legislative body to say, look, you guys have all, you built this Pepsi organization specifically for us to think about these things. And what we thought of is actually, first of all, we don't have a lot of time. We've been working very hard at this. Can we get an extension to do some continued thinking around this so that we do it right, and so we don't inadvertently create a model that's going to smash people. And to that end, so first is to file for an extension, right? The likelihood of that happening is unknown. My guess is largely not going to happen, but that's the reality of it. If we don't ask, we don't get anywhere. The second thing is to say, all right, so if we operate under the limited setup that you guys have established for us, this is the way we would envision sanctions. And the sanctions part is limited more along the lines of what supports need to be in play, and there's really no gray areas. So that what does a warning look like, and this team decides what the warning looks like. What does what does probation look like, and this is what probation looks like. And what does revocation look like, and this is what that looks like, and that's it. And then the third would be to say, if you'll give us 5 minutes of your time, this is what we think would be the coolest way of doing it, which would be to share a pretty nuanced accountability model and a corresponding nuanced sanctions model, which is the model that you guys had originally developed. So what that would mean then is next week we would have a conversation with the broader commission to sort of unanimously, or not unanimously, but by majority, come up with this agreement that these three things would be the next steps. One is to ask for an extension. Two would be to propose, this is how we're envisioning this based on the limited capacity and associated with how the 599 is worded. And here's an adjustment that we think could be made to 599, which would enable this really nifty, more nuanced process, both on the accountability and sanctions side of things. So that's what we would present. So the question that I have to you all is, and I wonder if we should pull up, and I don't have it in front of me, the Sanctions Committee's rubric. Can we look at the rubric and reduce it down to those things that we think need to be in play if we are under this assumption that you're one and done and that's it? There is no, you can't do a rubric. So what can we salvage of the rubric for the current law? And that's the task that this group should be navigating today. Does that make sense, or is that as ugly as the sky is here above us in Raleigh?
I believe it does. But I was on the last call.
Yeah. So Megan, are you on this as well?
Yes.
She might be muted or away from her keyboard for a moment.
Yeah, she said she's multitasking.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I was just talking and I was muted. Did you hear any of that?
No.
We didn't. I hope it wasn't the most profound thing you've ever said.
Okay. No worries. Oh, gosh. I don't know that I can replicate it. No, I just said I appreciate the explanation, and that all makes complete sense to me. It sounds good.
Okay. So what Kim has done is she's brought up, and my hope is that Kim will be able to navigate back and forth from the sanctions which are in the previous document and the nuanced tiered documentation that you have here, to see, and this may be a quick exercise, I'm not sure. But basically, if we see that any one of the accountability measures, and right now the accountability model is looking at anywhere between 4 to 6, depending on what happens in law. If any of them, regardless of whether we think one of them is somehow more important than another, doesn't matter. According to the way 599 works, it doesn't matter, and there would be a sanction. First would be a warning. What would be the first tier of warning? And let me hand it back over to you, Dr. Dempsey, because I know you were closest to tinkering with this thing. Given what we've been talking about all day this afternoon, what are your thoughts there?
So let me see if I'm answering what you're asking. Now that we know that it is a all-in decision, wait a minute, Kimberly, can you, for some reason when I saw both, it made this easier to say. Tell me again, Andrew, the question that I'm answering.
Well, it just seems to me, let's pull up, let me reframe it. Open up the colored dashboard for a second. All the way to the top. Okay, so here, what we see is, we see the allocation of a grade along the side there, not unlike the 4-tier system that we have in a variety of other things, from principal evaluations of teachers to superintendents evaluations, and a variety of things are on this 4-point scale. So that was the intent, which I think is a nifty way of doing it. What I am suggesting to you is no one, the way the law is worded, no one cares about that in the law. That the idea of whether you are developing, proficient, or exemplary cannot exist in that model. It just is, if you don't have one of those criteria, you're being warned. The end.
Right.
And so, given that, I'm back to wondering. It then comes down to what are we going to ask any institution to have to go through if they have been warned?
Right. What does it mean to be warned?
So on the rubric, could it still mean to be warned would be the equivalent of being at level 1, right?
To be on the gold.
Right. So, yeah, if you think of it, this may not be quite as far apart as we thought it was in the first phone call.
Okay, good.
In the General Assembly, there's off on. There's no gradients. You're either warned or you're not. Right?
Right.
Right.
So, that's in the eyes of the General Assembly. In the eyes of the people who are making the determination, are you being warned? Warned is level 1. Everything else is a continuous improvement model, but in the General Assembly's eyes, it's level 1. It's sort of like either you're incomplete or you're complete. But what we're saying is an assessment matter is there are 3 different levels of complete.
Of
So even if
completeness.
it's complete, we still want you to be focused on getting better. General Assembly doesn't care. General Assembly wants to know who's level 1 and who's level 2, 3, 4,
Correct.
right?
That's correct.
So the rubric does not necessarily have to go away.
Okay, good. So then, are you advocating then that level 1 would be anybody? Let's play it out. So can you go back to the sanctions for a second?
Level 1 would be any EPP that did not perform satisfactorily at the level of developing, proficient, or what's top, distinguished.
Yes. Might be exemplary.
So level 1 would be any institution that did not score at one of the, or did not, their outcomes were not at level 2, 3, 4. And what level 1 means is if you were not successful on any of the components. So it's not a weighted, you've got X number of components and you have to be developing, proficient, or distinguished on each of them as independent assessments. And if you don't perform at that level on 1 or more, you're at level 1.
All right. So let's play that out.
We have, which is an integrated, it's sort of a holistic assessment.
Right. So let's play it out for a second. So let's say Kim University falls short on EdTPA testing, and they are they're going to be declared this level 1, and in that the expectation for year 1, right, first year with that rating would be an action plan for continuous improvement and moving and trying to get up into the getting out from being in the doghouse, right?
Yes.
And that action plan, does that, I guess, what level of supports can or should we be more nuanced with that action plan? Does the action plan come to the department? Does the department review it? Do we hand it to peers? Do we give feedback on it? Like how is that generically strong enough, or do we need to be more specific?
What does the legislation call for us to be more specific?
Well, let's go back to the legislation. It actually says here, what it's specific about is the categories with which a warning is assigned but it says the state board shall adopt rules necessary for the sanction of EPPs that do not meet accountability standards or comply with the state law or rules. So
Right.
what they're
Doesn't
saying
define
is,
it.
yeah, they're saying that we have the flexibility, that Pepsi has the flexibility to make recommendations as to what should happen to those folks that are non-compliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Andrew and Kim, the only difference between where we were and where we are now is that in our previous design, it was an aggregate score. So you might not sort of pass the threshold on one element, but given how you might have done on another, the EPP could be developing, proficient, or distinguished. Given the new interpretation of 599, if you don't meet the expectation on one, it doesn't matter how you did on the others, you are at level 1.
I agree with that, and I'm asking, so if Kim University falls short in any one of those categories or all of those categories, so she's going to build a school improvement plan, what is the next order of business for her? Does she submit that to the department? Because I can tell you as a guy that doesn't run universities for a living, I don't know how valuable my insight on that is going to be, but that could be phase 1, or do we, because I feel like in other places there was some self-assessment versus peer review versus, I guess I'm wondering if some of those things that are further down year 2, year 3, should they be a part of this first year or not, or how does that play out? Maybe I'm saying something stupid. Maybe it's just read the gold bars, Andrew, because it's year 1 and nobody cares about year 1, and it's going to get more sophisticated as more repeat offenses occur.
Right, so if you go back, Kim, over to the rubric. So the institution's data is analyzed. They have not met a threshold in one or more of the elements that puts them at level 1. And so in the first year, they have to design an action plan for continuous improvement on the one or more areas where they did not pass.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably, Andrew, to your question, the one thing we might add to this is, even if it's an internally driven plan for continuous improvement, they still have to report that to DPI.
Okay,
So you can do an internal plan for improvement, but you still got to tell us what that plan is.
Right, it is not acceptable to say, yeah, we did it, and we have no evidence that you did anything.
Well, you gotta have a plan. What I would say is you gotta have a plan up front, and that plan could change. So you may get into that year and find out, we altered our plan because we decided on some things that would work better. And so you got, by X date in the calendar, you've got to submit at least a preliminary plan. We're gonna come back at the end of the year and look at how you did. We can report to the state board, Pepsi and DPI could report to the state board, this institution has been identified as being at level 1 on this element. They have submitted their preliminary plan for how they're going to improve on that element. At the end of the year, we're going to present the results of that effort to Pepsi and to the state board. In year 2, if they haven't gotten better, they're going to still have an action plan for continuous improvement, but there's got to be a peer technical assistance team selected in consultation with DPI. They submit a plan for that year. At the end of the year, they submit the results of that plan. Year 3, if you go back to where you have across the bottom of the rubric, so you still have the warning, probation. Probably the only thing the board and the General Assembly might ask is, why do you have 2 years of probation before you get to? They may say, no, you got a 3-year cycle. You don't get 4.
In which case,
Well,
I think in law, in some of those probations, it was over 3 consecutive years. So that's why that's in there.
Okay, well, then it works. Then the rubric still, I think, the rubric still works.
Megan, are you following all this? But you may be in and out, so.
Yes, I am following it, and I also recognize it's a little bit about what I don't know, so I'm also kind of just like listening and learning. So,
Okay.
yeah, feel the way you feel about deferring. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just say it back for myself, selfishly. It sounds to me like the worst case scenario is we keep with the spirit of the current law, which is somewhat limiting, and that's okay because we will just operate under the bottom row in the gold, and that's how we levy sanctions and probations and ultimately revocation associated with these steps. Now I'm going to throw this out for the moment, and we'll come back to it. But there are certain measures that we will not be able to see changes for 2 years. So that's a little bit confounding, right? So we just need to be sensitive to, some are obviously, an institution and it decides to go, and instead of taking a right turn, they take a left turn, and next year stuff has changed and we can take a look at it, right?
Well, Kim, can you scroll up to the top of the rubric?
Sure.
You could build that in up there, up above the EBP level, the first year, second year. You could build in a calendar. So if it's a 1 year, data cycle, then you attach actual dates to that. If it's a 2 year data cycle, you attach 2 year cycles to that, because then depending on which element, which element you had a problem with, that's going to determine your cycles. So the first year, it's not really first year, it's first component in a cycle. Sometimes that's a year, sometimes that's 2 years.
Right. Yep, I agree with you. So I guess what I'm saying is in some cases, we may identify to the board, these are the number of institutions that fell short, and this is the timeline for these folks. These folks will be giving us a school improvement plan. We'll take a look at their data next year. And for these 2 or 3 institutions, it's 2 years out because of the nature of the way the data are being collected.
Yes.
Okay.
And something else that just that triggered. Let me see if I can pull it back up in my head. Oh, the other difference between where we were and where we are now was the way we were thinking through this first. There was the potential for one rubric because it was a synthesized assessment. What the legislation dictates is for every element, you have an individual rubric. So there's no such thing as an aggregate rubric. If the legislation stays as it is, there's no such thing as an aggregate rubric. You've got to have a rubric. If you go back to what's in the legislative document, Kimberly, there is a rubric for each one of the sections of the model.
That's correct.
You don't have any there's no synthesized score.
Yeah, it's on or off. It's black or white.
Yes.
That's another way of looking at it. So Megan, I don't know. Go ahead.
I think the way we defined it was an aggregate rubric. There's no such thing as an aggregate rubric anymore.
Right, so Megan, since you're relatively new to this conversation we've been having earlier today, which is associated with the accountability, to sort of take that out one additional step, it would be like what we were trying to do was create this pyramid where certain things were more valuable than others, right? So you can imagine that the bottom of the pyramid might be something like EdTPA or a specific measure that really the various stakeholders felt was a really important component, and that might be 30% of this overall thing, whereas employer surveys, principal surveys, which we don't have a lot of data on, and they're not as critical for the outcomes of effective teachers we might weight that at 5%. And so this idea is that you could potentially be not doing well on one or two of those, but overall you're still doing fine. And so that's how we're talking about the aggregate, right? As opposed to what is currently in law, and why I put the brakes on it was that's not the way they're looking at it. They're saying each individual component is as valuable as the other. So if you miss any of them, it's a thumbs down, you get a warning, period. There's no aggregating up, so on average you're fine. And that's the big difference between what we started with and what we are grappling with right now. But I think
thank you for explaining it. That makes sense.
Okay, good. But the way I think you're sharing this, Dr. Dempsey, I think is very stable. I mean, can anybody punch any holes in that? I think that's fairly straight ahead. And then and if we can't, then that's the way we'll go with this. And then I have one follow-up, which is: do we think that does it render the usefulness of the blue, purple, and green completely moot? We just throw that out at that point, or is there a rationale for still assigning that, despite for learning purposes and school improvement planning, institution improvement planning? Is that still useful, or is that not useful?
As an EBB, I think it's useful. Because there's in a world where it was yes or no, we just say, look, it's level 1 or level 2, you're in or you're out. Then it's not useful. But if we wanted to hold on to that language and say, as a continuous improvement issue, even if you met the basic conditions, we want to drive we want to drive an expectation that you're still engaged in a continuous improvement model. So the basics is level 2. You don't want to be level 1. Level 2 means you're not level 1. But do you really just want to be level 2? You just want to do the basics, so you're not level 1. I don't think we want to send that message to the EPP. So the downward message to the EPPs is everyone should aspire to be level 4. For the purposes of the accountability model, level 2 keeps you open. And that's what gets reported to the state board as an annual
Agreed.
record.
Yeah. So let me, and now that I'm looking at this, if you look down in the second gold box, it talks about, for the first probation, it talks about peer technical assistance. I believe that necessitates the rest of the rubric, because we need to identify the high flyers to support the low flyers at that inflection point.
Yes. It also, by the way, Andrew, gets what we were talking about in the last meeting, if depending on how cooperative the General Assembly is going to be, if we break out that candidate quality component and talk about the distinction between individual candidate quality and cohort quality, that it would make it possible. You could have low bar expectations for the demographics of your look. We want at least this, and that can get you to level 2. But are you going to be? Is your program as strong as it can be if you're at level 2? And I think the answer to that is no. Level 2 keeps you open. It keeps the accountability monitors in the General Assembly and the State Board off your back. But we want you to be better than that.
Dr.
It's almost like a self-imposed. We want to be better than just staying open.
Right.
Dr. Dempsey, I was wondering, in addition to the model that we're working with here, to avoid confusion about what qualifies an EPP for warn, probation, or revocation, if we should have some kind of key or table that tells them what would need to happen in year 1, year 2, year 3 in order for them to have that status or label per se. for whatever number of indicators in whatever year.
You mean for the continuous improvement model?
Or just as a guide to let them know, I can get a warning if I have this in the first year for the overall performance.
Are you saying merge those two documents? Is that what you're advocating?
In some way, yes. Because to me, it can be very confusing for me to have to go back and read the legislation to know exactly how I'm going to qualify or what I need to look out for to become warned, probation, or revocation. And I want to know what exactly those qualifications are or, you know, stipulations are for that particular section.
Yeah, you're talking about copy the language that's in the legislation and put it into the rubric.
Right, and have it as, or even a reference chart that goes with it.
Yes, I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you got your brain around that. Maybe you can take a swing at that.
Sure. And just to guide you down here, range of sanctions, these are, you had asked earlier, Dr. Dempsey, about what exactly we needed to use for consequences, and these were the areas that the legislation had 1 through 4 right here. These are possible ones that they had described.
That was in the bill?
Yes, yes.
Oh, wow, we did better than we thought we did.
I know, so I think we added quite a few. Managing the EPP's enrollment, and I think these are, shall provide for the state board to assign other sanctions deemed necessary, including one or more of the following. So I think we've done that, one or more of the following. But just to let you know that some were in here.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it works. Now, help me remember that from the earlier conference call. Why was it? I can't remember now why we thought we potentially needed the delay in the start date. It was because we couldn't figure out what.
I think you mean requesting the delay?
That we requested, 2020 rather than 2019.
I think it was just to try and make sure that all of this stuff is getting laid out. You know what I'm not sure about is whether what we're building applies for. I think it doesn't apply until 2020, correct?
I have to go back and look.
We have to look. It depends on if I think Andrew Lakis's.
I think it is 20.
I think Andrew Lakis's concern was if we have to suddenly hold everybody accountable to this super quickly, we may be running down a path that's fraught with problems. But what I'm wondering now is if the current law or additional laws after it somehow said thou shalt have this and apply it, you'll have this put together and people will start be working on it, but you won't really be held accountable to it until 2020 or 2021.
Right. I remember what it was. It was that over a problem with a sub-point, you could shut down a program. And was that really the intention of the General Assembly? And in order to tease that out, we needed more time. It was on the issue of the quality of the cohort versus the individual student indicator. And if everybody was performing well, the problem was that everybody was not diverse. Were we literally going to close the program, turning out candidates that could pass Ed TPA, but the cohort was not diverse? And, we basically inadvertently reduced the number of teachers coming out of EPP.
Right.
That was what we were asking for more time. But if it doesn't go live until July 1, 2020, then we've got time to do that. Your concern, Andrew, was going back when you had to go back to the state board. You said that was October.
Well, no, not the state board. This is the bipartisan committee. This is the legislature.
So they can,
Right.
the accountability statuses of warrant and probation during the 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023 school years. The state board may assign the accountability status of revoked beginning with the 2023-2024 school year.
Yeah, so right there in 599, it's actually saying that we're gonna actually inflict these wounds accordingly by 2021, 2022.
And
We could-
2018 to 2021, you can require technical assistance to an EPP at the EPP's expense based on reported performance measures.
So basically, they're giving us a couple years of dry runnage.
Yes,
Okay,
which is
so
smart.
2021 could be a pilot year.
Right, and we'll have hopefully some of the accountability measures up on our dashboarding by the end of this year.
Okay, good. Oh, that really, yeah, it seems to be a totally workable timeline. Should not have said that out loud, but,
We should probably share that paragraph off with both Dr. Graham and Andrew Lakes,
Yes.
because I think that will help give.
And Mark, because he had joined.
Was he in there? Okay.
He was just quiet.
Okay. All right. So Megan, what are you thinking about with all this? Is this making sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's also something that I, don't know as much about or don't consider the perspective of as much. So deferring to you guys and learning about it as I go works for me. Yeah, it all makes enough. It all makes enough sense. It's a new world, and I appreciate learning about it.
Is that relatively similar or complete opposite to how you handle how these kind of things get played out at the school level?
No, it's actually pretty similar. I have, different thresholds for what people need to do after year 1, 2, and 3. Warning versus action planning and performance counseling letter. Like it's pretty aligned to all of it. So it's familiar language and it's familiar process. It's just at a different level, right? But it's pretty commiserate with what we do.
Okay. And then I guess the last, I can't drive. Sorry.
You're fine.
Let's go back to the model for a second. So the last thing that the tier or the level 1, level 2, level 3. Walk me through that, Dr. Dempsey. How we achieve that again, just for my own edification.
you mean the way I explained it earlier?
Yeah.
For information up, state board, general assembly, et cetera, there are two, it would in essence be a 2-tiered system.
Yeah. Hold on.
There's
No. What I was thinking was how do we calculate the level 3 and 4 and all that? Is that the thresholds we'll have to assign to each of the components?
Yeah. Well, what we'd have to figure out is if you take the 5 components,
Mm-hmm.
performance-based standard or criteria for annual evaluations,
Mm-hmm.
there's a dividing line. So there's either you met that standard or you didn't.
Right, and then right. So we would set different cuts. I could envision a standard deviation or a half a standard deviation would get you through the different levels. Okay.
Right, and for state board purposes, there's above the line and below the line.
Right. That's right. Okay.
And above the line, for purposes of continuous improvement, you have gradients.
Got it. All right, I got it. I think I can now officially say this. Now, I don't know if I can say it an hour from now, but right now it's pretty clear in my head.
But it's recorded, so we can listen to it again.
So I think what we need to do is when we present this to the commission and the board and the legislature, we just have Kim come in with a tape recorder and play
We're
2
just
hours.
gonna play what you said, Dan.
That's what I'm using, yeah. I so seldom am quoted when I mean to be quoted, so that.
Well, remember, if it all goes sideways, we'll blame Kim.
I'm okay with that. I get blamed for a lot.
We'll pick somebody.
That's right.
Take somebody at the UNC system office and blame it on them.
How about Julie Cowell?
I'm not she's not my boss, but I like for her to be a friend, so pick somebody else.
Okay.
Pick Margaret. Margaret Stone's not there anymore. Blame it on her.
All right, that's perfect. Darn you, spellings. Okay. I think we understand what we need to do. I'm really happy. I mean, first I've really looked at it, at this level of granularity since the moment. But I'm happy to see that it's fairly stable if we just stick with that bottom row. And my only fear, I mean, altruistically, when if we go to the very careful effort to prescriptively help each EPP figure out where they fall in that level system, my only fear is that 30 of them are just going to throw the thing away because it's an on-off switch, and they just are not, they don't care. That would be my fear.
Okay, I mean, I'd like to believe we would not be one of those, but we could build in some kind of, I can't think of an analogy, but, it's like Gold Star. I mean, these are programs that if we set up, and the last thing I want to do is create some kind of competition between institutions. Right. So it would be almost like if DPI or the state board were to say, look, we're not saying place A is better than place B, but we're saying if you're willing to do this work, we're going to recognize it in some kind of designation. So you're a distinguished EPP. Right. If you're willing to pursue it. You don't have to pursue it. It's like national board certification. You don't have to be national board certified, but if you are, we recognize it.
Right. Yeah, maybe we would have to do that. I mean, I just don't know. I'd have to ultimately we'll pass this around to the various institutions and get some additional feedback once the commission's seen it, but maybe, I know that you just said it yourself, Dr. Dempsey, and I feel the same way. If I was running an institution, I would want to know how to make myself better and by what criteria. And if it's data driven and evidence based, then that's only helping me. So.
Yeah. And in the world of higher ed, what in essence we've created is a pass-fail model. Well, nobody really wants to say they took a course pass-fail.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. How good is your program? Well, we passed.
Right.
Yes. So.
Doesn't sound good.
All right. Well, any other thoughts for the good of the cause? I think this has helped me immensely to get through this. So yes. I feel like we can navigate this, and we will certainly take it down to Tom and run it through him. And our immediate next step would be to carve out those dates of the expectations so that we can share that with Andrew Lakis and
yes.
Van and Michael Moore.
Actually, I'll send it to that whole committee.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was going to ask Kimberly and Andrew on a totally different subject that Megan would not need to stay on the phone. It's a question I asked Kimberly earlier about EdTPA. So we want to end this and let Megan get off. She can start her Friday afternoon.
All right, Megan, do you have anything else?
Oh, guys, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks for including me and letting me listen in and learn. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great one.
Thanks so much, Megan. Have a good weekend.
I'm gonna turn off the.
You too.
Okay, and just hang tight, Dr. Dempsey. She's gonna